All right. Well, hello, everybody, and thanks for coming on today. I am David Jones-Gilardi, Developer Relations Engineer here at the Open Platform at IBM. So today, I want to go ahead and I'm going to show you a tool, an open source tool called Langflow, and we're going to get into doing some, having some fun with some agentic AI and bringing that into in applications. So let me go ahead and share my screen, get that going. Do this. All right. So hopefully you are all seeing here on my screen. You should be seeing two things. So as I mentioned a moment ago, Langflow is an open source project. Right now we're at something like 144,000 GitHub stars. So it's pretty popular from that standpoint. It's doing really well, and it is one of, I would argue, one of the like a primary visual building agentic platforms out there. So here's what I'd like to do. So first, I'm going to show everyone here how we can build out a basic agent with Langflow. I'm going to talk a little bit about Langflow and kind of what makes it special. And then we're going to do something kind of fun, right? Okay, so on the right-hand side is Langflow. So Langflow, you can install it a multitude of ways. You could do it through a Docker container. You could download an executable, or you could do a pip install or UV pip install, things like that. And once you have it running, you can interface like what you see here over on the right-hand side. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say new flow, right? If you had never come into Langflow before, you'd start with that new flow. Now, right out of the gate, what happens is you're going to be presented with a set of templates. So if you want to explore maybe some agentic use cases or RAG or something like that, you just click on one of these and get going with a working flow out of the gate. But what I'm going to do today is I'm going to say blank flow. And I'm doing that because I think the best way to kind of illustrate what Langflow does is to just show you. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with Langflow, Langflow is a visual studio for developers that allows you to build out GenAI, agentic, and RAG workflows using a low-code, no-code, drag-and-drop UI, right? So let's go ahead and take a look at what that's like. So I've got this new flow here. Like I said, I started with a blank flow. Now, on the left-hand side, you'll see all sorts of components, right? Things like inputs and outputs, models, agents, various data operations, all sorts of things. Like, one of the things I think that makes Langflow special is that it's both model and vector store agnostic, right? So if I search here and I say go over here, do it again, model. There we go. You can see down here all of these various model providers, and you can imagine within each of those providers are potentially dozens or more of various models, right? So it really means whether you're talking that you want to say use OpenAI, or if you want to use IBM Watson X, or if you want to use Ollama or LM Studio for local models, whatever, Langflow doesn't care, right? You can use whatever you want for both your LLMs and your agents. So let's go ahead and start building out a basic flow. So what I'm going to do is in any kind of agentic flow, right? Whether you're using Langflow or not, by the way, you need some kind of input and some kind of output, and then you're going to have the agent in the middle, right? So I'm going to bring an agent in. And then you'll notice these little nodes, right? These little colored nodes here. So these nodes denote type. Obviously I've used Langflow a lot, so I'm familiar with what these colors are. As you start to use it, you start to get very familiar with those. But what's really nice is that you can then very quickly visually just kind of denote which is which, right? So I'm just going to wire this chat input into the input, and I'm going to get my response and wire it to a chat output. Okay, great. Now you may have noticed right out of the gate, I have this model provider here, right? And yeah, you can see that, some of the top model providers are here. I mentioned Ollama, but I mentioned that you can hook up dozens of different providers, that you're not like limited to a particular few. And that's where this connect other models comes into play. So if I wanted to, I could just click on this and then see what it did. So I could just drag any one of those over, connect up, and then hook it up to my node. But for now, what I'm going to do is, let's see, I'm just going to use Ollama. I have Ollama running locally. I'll refresh my list. And I do tend to like, if you haven't used it, it's actually really nice. They have their cloud now. So I do tend to like the using the open source GPT 120 billion parameter model. Okay, now with nothing else, right now, I have a very basic agent, right? And I could, in fact, interact with this agent. But in order for an agent to really do something useful, right, you need tools, right? So, part of the whole point of having agency with an agent is for it to extend past the model it has, or the knowledge it has in its model out and use external tools, be able to, look at the internet, things like that. So what I'm going to do in this particular case is I'm going to come over to my MCP servers. Now, LangFlow is MCP native. So both on tool use and exposing flows as MCP. I'll get to that latter in a moment. But what I'm going to do right now is I'm just going to say something like GitHub read only, right? Now, what I've done is I previously configured one of these. So whether it's just a JSON blob, or if you're using streamable HTTP or standard IO, you just put in configuration parameters and then it'll set it up. And notice on this, once it read from the server here, now it's got a set of all these tools. These are the ones that have come from GitHub. And what's really cool from an MCP tool use and tool use in general in LangFlow is this tool mode up here. So if I flip this into tool mode, you'll see now I have a whole set of actions that become available that I could potentially use. But then when I want to use this as a tool in my agent, I literally just wire it up, right? And now right out of the gate, if I wanted to, I could start asking questions about, GitHub, my, particular repos, things like that. Now, what I'm going to do, I'm going to get rid of this one. I'm going to say URL. And I want to show you a quick example of something. So something else you can do, you're not limited to MCP, even though MCP, by the way, has now significantly increased the landscape of the types of tools, the amount of tools that you have for agents. In LangFlow itself, many of the underlying components that there also have this tool mode. So I can take a component that's used to, say, scrape a URL, I can flip it into tool mode and just wire it up, okay? So why might I want to do that? So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to ask a question. So another nice little feature in LangFlow is I can go into this playground up here, and I can just, before I've even hooked up my application, we haven't even gotten to the application yet, right? So before I've done that, I can start having a conversation. So I can say something like convert 200 USD to INR. Now, I like this particular question or this particular statement because in order to do this properly, an agent has to be able to call out and get the latest information, right? And that's why I hooked up that URL tool. So you see it's giving me this answer, but what I really want to do is I want to see what it did. So if you notice underneath the hood, you'll see this executed fetch content, and you see this currency converter URL. And if you look at the tool itself, right, the URL, you'll see this action, this fetch content action. So this is super cool because now I have an agent, my GPT OSS model here, that was able to determine that it needed to use the fetch content tool here. And it went and got the latest exchange information, right? Because if I didn't have that tool, or if I didn't have a way for the agent to be able to talk outside of itself, right, it would be giving me an answer based on whatever the model was trained on. And a lot of these models, they're a couple of years old or a year old or something like that. So that's just a really important part of the functionality, and LangFlow makes that pretty darn easy. Now, this is great, but then really as an application developer, at the end of the day, what I want to build an app, and I want to be able to leverage an agent to do something for me, right? And so you'll notice up here, there is this share. This little share drop down, if I go to API access, you'll see some snippets. Now, usually I kind of focus on Python, but what I'm going to show you in a minute is JavaScript. So I'm going to come over to the JavaScript thing. And you'll see there's some key information here. For one, you do need an API key for LangFlow itself. And I'll show you how to get to that in a moment. And it's really easy. You just click and go. But you'll see this payload, right? You have your output type, your input value. This is the question you're going to be asking the query, right? And then you have a response, right? And you'll notice that I'm going to call something like this. There's this API. So both LangFlow has its own streaming API, but if you want, you can also use the OpenAI responses API. And both of those are streaming enabled, right? So if you're already using the OpenAI responses API, you can just flip over. As a matter of fact, where you would normally pass the model to your OpenAI responses API, you just pass this flow ID, right? So you can use it in place and it'll call your LangFlow flows. Okay, great. So this is an example of a super basic model. And if you read my abstract, right, you say that I'm talking about being able to create an agent and then hooking up to an app in faster, quicker time than your coffee cools down kind of thing. And at this point, normally what I would do is I would whip up an app right where we're talking and things like that, and just connect it. But I wanted to do something a little bit more interesting today, because I don't know about all of you, but I've done lots of chat apps. I think chatbots are kind of all over the place, and I wanted to do something a little different. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move over to something I call Pixel Ticker. So now we see, again, two different things. On the left-hand side is a more complex agent, again, using Langflow. And I'm going to get into all the components. Don't worry about that too much. And on the right-hand side is this app. So this is Next.js app. This is why I mentioned a moment ago I wanted to do things using JavaScript. And what this does is, yes, I have a way that I could chat, or I can chat with the agent, but it's a bit more complex than that. And this is where it's really leveraging some of the really key new features of the latest Langflow 1.7 that I'm going to show you in a moment. But what this does is when I make a request, and I'll just do this real quick. Let's compare Tesla and NVIDIA performance.
Processing your request. Compare TSLA versus NVIDIA performance over time.
Hopefully you all heard that. I don't know if you recognize that voice. This is, I'm by the way, I'm a kid of the 80s, right? A kid of the 70s and 80s. And I just have a thing for, pixel art and retro stuff and synthwave and all that. So a lot of my apps kind of look like this. But so what it's doing right now, though, is it's going to the flow that you see over here on the left-hand side. And it's actually using a new component in Langflow 1.7 called the Smart Router. And so where this comes into play is it allows you to use an LLM, which I'm doing here with LM Studio. So I'm actually using a local model to determine which route I want to go into. And depending on that route, it will actually... Oh, here it goes.
TSLA and NVIDIA have followed very different...
Okay, we don't need to listen to him read all that out, but now you can see that it just rendered this chart that came out of here. So what's actually happening is if I go into one of these, so I have individual agents depending on the type of request, right? And what it's going to do is actually going to spit out some structured JSON, and that structured JSON then triggers one of these UI components in the app. So it allows to have, say, a bit more kind of interactive experience and not so much just the regular kind of chatbot experience. I'll do another one while I talk here real quick, and then kind of explain more of what's going on here. Okay, so actually while it's doing that, I'm going to pull him over so we have more room. We can kind of see things. Great. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at some of the components that are in here. For one, you'll notice I mentioned this a second ago. I'm using LM Studio, right? So even though the agents themselves, as you saw, they had some of the default providers in there. Again, I have all sorts of providers I can hook up to. If you're not familiar with LM Studio, it's kind of like Ollama that you can run local models. It's actually really nice from a development standpoint because it gives you a real-time log of everything that's going on with your models, which is nice. So I like the Gwen 3 model here. It does a really nice job of being the smart router. But what is this doing? Well, the smart router, if I open this table, you'll see for each one of these, I'm giving it a definition, right? I'm telling it, hey, I want you to trigger when, right? So in this case, for the line chart, if we're talking about performance line charts, and then here's some keywords and phrases. And it's the same thing for the rest of these. So then on every request, right, it's taking my request and my saying, show me Apple stock prices with metrics, or show me trading data, whatever. And the LLM here, Gwen 3, is now determining which route I go to, right? And you can see these lines that are connecting up to these different routes. And it looks, it looks somewhat complex, but it's really just kind of a repeated pattern, if you will. So where I have the data table agent up, we could see this one. I'll expand over here, right? This is my metrics grade agent, right? It's the same kind of thing. So in this case, I'm giving the example structure. I'm telling it what I want the output to be, right? And then finally, you'll notice this right here, the stock MCP. So in this case, I have tied into a Yahoo Finance stock ticker MCP server. And so that's where all of these are coming from. And so that actually gives me real-time, up-to-date, like accurate stock information that the agents can then use. And where this is really cool. I mean, in my particular case, I'm using the smart router to set different prompts for different agents. They're all using the same model. There could be cases where you maybe have different models for different use cases. Maybe you have different MCP tools depending on what you're doing, right? As a matter of fact, down here in my general agent, you'll notice this one. If I open this guy up, this one's just GPT-5 Nano. right? I wanted to keep it nice and small. This is kind of the general purpose one. And it has the ability to, look at the web, use URLs, things like that. So it allows me a lot of flexibility in what I'm doing. Okay, let's see. I'm going to pull this back over here. Right, and you can see I asked another question, and then I get this kind of display. I'll do the trading data one, and then we'll come back. Oh, so for the code, right? So if you remember a second ago, actually, if I come back here, and I was showing here what this looks like, the payload, needing the API key. So I'm going to pass a header of X API key. This is all in the snippet. You can get it right out of Langflow. And then again, this particular path here, this one I'm in particular looking at the /API/v1/run. And if you take a look here in the code in my query Langflow service, right, you'll see here's my input, output value, input type, right? Those match the snippet. Here's the payload. I'm now adding in a session ID. Now this is really important from an application development standpoint. You don't have to use it. It's not required, but it's a super cool, almost like unsung feature as far as I'm concerned in Langflow. And why is that? Well, let's take a look at what this thing does. So when I pass a session ID in my payload, when I'm using the Langflow API, it will automatically pass that session ID into any of the underlying components that need it. And in this case, where that really comes into play, if I come down to the chat we've been having, is because I have a single session ID that I'm keeping session with this conversation, right? That means every question I've been asking, right, stays in session. And why is it important? Well, because all of my agents are also now using that session, which means they're sharing context, right? So then I can come back over here and I can say something like, give me a summary of what we've been talking about. Turn that back on. And then we'll give that a second to, you can see it, it's going and figuring it out, right? And if I come over to the playground, you can see the question's been asked, right? So the agent is going to work on it here for a moment, and we'll let it respond. So that one little parameter to pass into the request payload or the payload is like super important and super functional, right? There's nothing I have to do in the flow to enable this other than passing in the session ID itself, right? And again, as I mentioned, this Langflow API key, I got to pass that across. So I told you I would show you how to set that up. It's super easy. When I'm in Langflow itself, if I come up to my little gravatar and I go to settings, you'll see these Langflow API keys. I can literally just come over here and just say add new, and that's it. I just pass that API key. And the reason why we do this, obviously, is because from a security standpoint, if you previous versions of Langflow, like from, I want to say like before 1.6 or something, did not have this, which means if you didn't have a security layer when you deployed the thing, anybody could just walk right in there and just execute your flow. You clearly don't want that, right? So the API key ensures that you have to have that key in order to execute the flow. Let's come back on over and let's see here. Right, so take a look. So I asked it to give me a summary of what we've been talking about. And now you can see that it's able to correctly summarize, the various things that we had before, right? So again, very simply able to share the context across all of those agents, even though I'm using 5 of them in this particular case. Okay, let's see. Oh, great. Now, I see a question here. Let's see. Shareem is asking if you could share the GitHub link to Langflow. Of course. Oh, matter of fact, I have something specifically for you on that. Okay. Yeah. And by the way, if we have any other questions, feel free to bring them through. So anyway, this is just an example of something where instead of having your regular kind of just chat bot, it's a more interactive kind of interface that is using a bit more, complexity in agent, but something that gives you a lot of flexibility to be able to, adapt your responses depending on what your user's requesting. And with that, I'll ask, do we have questions, Sydney, that we can that I can field right now in the time we have left? Okay, I said yes. Okay, yes. How about while we're waiting, I'm going to turn on my music. Let's see. Can you guys hear that? I have music in this app. I like the synthwave thing, so it's like, oh, that's a great question. All right. I should probably turn the music off to answer that. So the question is how long did it take me to make this? I started it last week. shameless plug, by the way. I don't know if you picked up on this, but I am using IBM Bob. And, whether or not if you've used, say, Cursor or Windsurf or Claude Code or anything like that, IBM Bob, is a very capable AI coding, IDE and stuff. So I've been pair programming with IBM Bob. I would say the initial, here's what's really awesome to me, by the way, and where I think some of the promise of doing things with AI coding comes into play, is that a lot of I designed the original idea. I had the thought of what I wanted to do. But interestingly enough, as I was working with the coding agent to, build out the kind of cyberpunk styling and everything, it kind of took it and went with it. And so what was amazing to me is as we were building out these components, it automatically applied the styling and things like that. Did a really nice job of being able to define and structure my Next.js project properly and all that. So yeah, I would say the initial prototype I had working probably within an hour. But now I've gone on, I've actually added a bunch. There's another part to this, by the way, that's this pixel space. I wasn't actually going to talk about it today, but that's okay. We can do one of these. And just to give you an idea of...
tell me about Jupyter.
Okay, an idea of what's possible. So I would say the initial part, like I said, was just about an hour, but I've added a bunch of capability. I'm going to show you some of that here. So I've maybe at this point, I'd say 3 days worth of actual solid effort. Let's see. Then I see another question.
Request complete.
Here we go.
Jupiter is the largest planet in our solar system, a gas giant famous for its massive size, colorful cloud bands, and dozens of moons.
Okay, so in this case, this is another example of a case now where I have different types of UI components that are being triggered based off. This is obviously an astronomy one, right? And if I were to tell me about the solar system.
Processing your request. Show me the solar system.
Okay, now while that's responding, I see some questions. Should we consider this as a tool or agent in terms of IBM Orchestrate? Yeah, that's a great question. So something super cool about Langflow is that you can actually export these. So if I export this as a JSON blob, I can then import it into
our solar system with.
Here we go. I can then import it into Orchestrate, right? So I can actually take what I'm doing in Langflow and I can bring it in there and I can start to use it in Orchestrate. There's a lot more coming on that front, by the way. Right now, as I'm talking about Langflow is obviously a very open source approach and everything, but definitely more to come there. How is this different to Kuga? Yeah. So Kuga, by the way, to that point, Kuga is in here. You can actually bring it. So Kuga is a more advanced type of agent. I didn't need it in this particular case, right? But you'll see we do have Kuga support. Now, Kuga is like a generalist agent. It has the ability to say execute in browsers, kind of, it takes a more generalist approach. These, I knew exactly what I wanted these agents to do, and it was very directed. So I didn't, now that you pointed out, though, I might do that. I'll have to experiment. But yeah, Kuga is different. It's I'd say a more advanced type of agent, but you have support right here in Langflow. So it's not like Langflow and Kuga are different. Kuga is just an agent you can employ in Langflow, right? And then here you see the response. Now I asked it about the solar system to give me something there, right? And so again, what Langflow is doing is it's routing these requests to these specialized agents that are giving me out JSON blobs that I can use then and visualize things. Let's see. Oh, thank you, Ibuk. I appreciate that. Are there student discounts for Langflow and IBM Bob? I have no idea. But since Langflow is open source, you can just download it, right? So when I give you the QR code here in a moment, you'll be able to scan that. You can go right there and you can just download it and use it. There's no cost. And if you're really looking at things from a student perspective, that's exactly where things like LM Studio and Olama come into play. Because you can just download those, you can just download open source models. And there's a lot of really capable ones. Again, like I'm using up here, like GPT OSS. I would, by the way, suggest that if you're doing this on your local machine, that you probably want to use the 20 billion parameter one, not the 120 billion parameter one. You need like at least 36 gigs of RAM for this. You'll notice I'm using this Dash Cloud. So Olama recently did enable cloud accounts. So you can, it's like 20 bucks a month and you can run them. And I like doing it because they're nice and fast, but you could do this completely for free if you want to. Okay, looking at some other questions. So Langflow is different from IBM Bob in the way that Langflow is the agent. Bob has an agent, but in Bob, you're not going to get this kind of granular control over the agent itself. The agent is actually kind of obscured from you, right? Like you work with the agent, maybe you give the agent some instructions and such like that, but you're not going to get the deep control. So Langflow is giving you the underlying granular control over the agent itself, right? And interestingly enough, because Langflow, I mentioned before, is MCP native, I can just expose any of my flows. They're automatically MCP enabled. So that means that I could build an agent here. I've done this, by the way. I can build an agent here in Langflow. Let's say it does something particularly useful for me in my development. And now I can just expose that to Bob and hook it up over MCP. So now Bob can leverage my downstream Langflow agent, right? And this gives you a ton of control over here. You can control. I didn't do that for this because I wasn't doing that kind of case, but I can give it descriptions. I can give it a lot more descriptive names and everything, and I can have a whole set of these n number of these MCP tools that then something like Bob can use. So yes, Bob has an agent, and Langflow lets you build agents, but they're not quite the same thing, right? Okay, let's see. I don't know the answer. When you import it and orchestrate, the question is, when I import it into orchestrate, should I import as a tool or an agent? I honestly don't know. That is, I'm really more focused on the open source stuff. So that's something that you'd have to kind of figure that out from the orchestrate side of things. Oh, how will you find pickles? Well, funny enough, I wasn't, I have these things. I haven't deployed this yet, but all of the things that I build are open source, right? And I'm still working on, I call this Pixelverse because I have Pixel Space and Pixel Ticker and things like that. But my GitHub is SonicDMG, right? Feel free, go grab it if you want. It's not, my README is not quite ready. This is literally hot off the presses, right? This is something I've been building and kind of ideating on. But yeah, everything in there, you can go and grab it if you so choose from GitHub. Let's see. And let's see. Are you the same man who's in the Langflow ad? It depends on which Langflow ad. If you see the hat, right? I very well may be. There's been a lot of, we did a bunch of ads for a bunch of competitions and stuff, and I was definitely one of those people. So that might be the case. So, all right, by the way, so I don't want to forget this. If you're interested in checking out Langflow, go scan that QR code. That'll bring you to langflow.org. And you can go get a bit more information. You can take a look at the GitHub repo. You can, again, it's totally open source. You can download it and run it locally and have fun playing around. And I highly suggest, if you have not done anything with agents before, when you start up Langflow and you say, new flow, use one of those templates. Use one of the agent ones. As a matter of fact, if I show you real quick, I want to give folks a moment just to get that QR code if you haven't already. I'll put it back up here in a second. But let's see. Yeah, we'll come over here real quick. Yeah, actually, no, I'll come back out one. Sorry. I got a new flow. If you go down here to agents, there's all sorts of examples, right? There's all sorts of different agentic examples here. And you'll see that there's different use cases and everything like that. So again, it's really nice to just click on one of those and to see the end result. And with that, I see that there are no other questions. So thank you, everybody, for your attention. This was really fun. I hope you learned something useful, and we'll be seeing you soon. All right, take care. Thank you.